Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This webinar is a follow-up to the discussion that was had during the 2025 legislative session with the House Concurrent Resolution 6008, better known as the HCR bill, that referenced Amtrak and the potential passenger rail service in South Dakota. So as many of you remember, HCR 6008 was a non-binding resolution aimed at expressing South Dakota's support for exploring Amtrak services in our state. It envisioned the possibility of connecting South Dakota to a Denver to Minneapolis route with potential stops in Rapid City, Pierre, and Sioux Falls. And the thought process behind the resolution was pretty clear, that rail could strengthen our tourism industry, expand our business opportunities, and improve our mobility for rural communities, as well as connecting South Dakota to the national rail network, much like the interstate system did decades ago. So the resolution passed the House 49-21, and then it moved into the Senate Transportation Committee, and it ultimately failed in the Senate floor by just one vote. So just again, so people understand, it carried no funding, there was no mandate, and there was no commitment. It was only a request to continue the exploration and federal engagement. But it still sparked a lot of interesting conversations, and our presenter here had numerous conversations across the state after that. So there's a lot of curiosity, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and then there's also this genuine desire across the state to understand the real possibilities and potential limitations of a passenger rail service in South Dakota. So to kind of help us navigate these questions and kind of fill us in on what our next steps could be, I'd like to welcome Dan Bilka of All Aboard Northwest. He's been very involved with this rail options across the upper Midwest and Mountain West, and he's a wealth of information. And so for the next 40 minutes or so, Dan is going to give us a presentation about what he's all involved in. So I will turn it over to you, Dan.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Carmen. Again, I'm Dan Bilka, co-founder and president of All Aboard Northwest, which is a region-wide passenger rail transportation advocacy organization focused on the greater Northwest region, as we call it. Additionally, I serve on the Rail Passengers Association Board of Directors nationally as a vice chair, and I'm South Dakota born and raised here in rural Lake County. So it's great to have this chance to speak with you all and see what we can do for our next legislative session to put some of these misconceptions to bed. So let's see, next slide, please. That we as All Aboard Northwest advocate for passenger rail for addressing what we call part of a seamless transportation network that lets people to get from here to there without being an arduous burden, including all the transportation modes we think about. Next slide. Such as highways, airports, bike lanes, sidewalks, transit, and so forth. And next slide. And passenger rail as a key component of a multimodal, intermodal transportation network. Next slide, please. One thing we like to highlight is that nationally, something that people often do not realize is that 30% of Americans are non-drivers. They might be too old, too young, poor, disabled, or have other reasons why they're not drivers, or especially like in South Dakota here, we might have more senior citizens who are more, light drivers. They, might be able to get around town okay, or, to the county seat, but, states or travels across the state can be arduous even in good weather. And then think about the weather like we got this last weekend. What does that mean like for their freedom of mobility? Next slide, please. That we advocate for passenger rail for addressing what we call the 3 E's, for the economic benefits, the environmental benefits, and equity benefits, meaning specifically equity for rural areas of the United States. And no matter where we go across the region, we find that at least 2 of the 3 resonate with people, whether we're in the Pacific Northwest or whether we're down in Kansas and Iowa, that people really recognize how these ideas are meaningful and can come home to them in their communities. Next slide, please. Ultimately, what we really try to emphasize around here is that trains mean business, both for the communities that they serve and the state and nation at large. Next slide. that they bring immense economic benefits, and especially the western routes, such as the Empire Builder to our north and the Southwest Chief to our south, bring over 10 times the rate of return on taxpayers' equity, so that the taxpayers put in this funding to operate the services and receive even greater benefits from that. And that critically, passenger rail is great not just for endpoint to endpoint, such as the route noted, which would be the Twin Cities to Denver, but a multitude of single seat rides and many overlapping city pairs along the way, whether it be Sioux Falls or Pierre or Rapid City or elsewhere, that being able to provide the opportunity to hop on and hop off. Next slide. And that one thing that to highlight is our dear sister state, North Dakota, receives about 28, almost $29 million of economic benefits every year for their once daily, or dare I say once nightly, Empire Builder service that goes through the state mostly in the middle of the night. And they already receive, $28 million is nothing to really turn their noses up at. So imagine on how much more beneficial to have daylight service could be for them as well. Next slide, please. And really in how these services are transformative and can be really beneficial to communities that they serve. One precedent we like to pull up is our friends down in Meridian, Mississippi, which is a vibrant community, about 40,000 people, so about the size of Aberdeen or so. They invested about $7.5 million in a new Amtrak intermodal station, and then had over $200 million of development and investment in their downtown area in the last 20 years. So yes, if you build it, they will come. Next slide. And one precedent to highlight closer to home is the Amtrak Borealis service, which just started last year between the Twin Cities and Minnesota to Chicago, duplicating service along the Empire Builder route, and that has been smashing expectations over the past year, far exceeding what they were expecting. And this is even with the critical shortage of equipment that they've had over this last year. And even with that, they've been far exceeding expectations. So that friends in Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're already moving on by wanting to get even more service on this route as well. Next slide, please. And this is a map that I like to bring up that really kind of is what kicked our efforts as All Aboard Northwest and our coalition across the greater Northwest into gear. And as you can see, this map here came out a couple years ago, the Amtrak Doesn't Connect Us map. And I'm not sure that some people realize there's a big old hole up in a region. 2 clicks, please. And that unfortunately some people in Washington, D.C. and the Gulf seem to forget that people live here too. And it's high time that we get on the map with more and better passenger rail services. Next slide. And this is our working vision map for All Aboard Northwest. The yellow lines are the existing skeletal Amtrak services, such as a builder to the north, and that the blue lines are the proposed new connections we want to see added into the national system. And almost all of them are existing legally secured railway rights-of-way. So we're not talking about eminent domain. We're not talking about true high-speed rail. We're talking about utilizing the existing systems that we have and building them up for the next 150 years. One of the only exceptions really we made on this map to more fully unite a true regional network is a new proposed connection along the I-90 corridor in the northern Black Hills to really fully unite along the I-90 corridor nationally. Next slide, please. And this brings to the bulk of what has really kicked our efforts into high gear, and what was the impetus for the resolution last year was the FRA Amtrak Long Distance Service Study. Next slide. That through the IIJA in 2021, Congress directed the FRA to look both at former Amtrak long distance routes along with the potential for new Amtrak long distance routes. This is how they divided up the contiguous 48 states, and that, as you can see, South Dakota is included both in the Midwest and the Northwest region. So really recognizing this sort of a transitional space that we in sister state North Dakota occupy. And that myself, for All Aboard Northwest, was in the room and at the table with the FRA, Class 1 railroads, state DOTs, and other key national stakeholders really looking at these things and developing the network we need to have for tomorrow. We participated in both the Midwest and the Northwest regions. Next slide, please. When considering new potential long distance routes, Congress gave 4 primary criteria to the FRA to look at, and they are thus, is to link and serve large and small communities as part of a regional rail network, focus on rural areas of the United States, provide enhanced connectivity for the national system, and to reflect public engagement and local and regional support for passenger rail. Those are the four primary criteria that Congress gave the FRA to look at. So they're not looking at quote unquote population or population density. These are the four primary criteria that the FRA needed to fulfill. Next slide, please. While I said that they're not obsessing about population or population density, they do take into consideration and look at what is the travel demand. And as many of us across South Dakota recognize, that we have a disproportionately high travel demand compared to our low population and low population density. And as you can see from the Midwest region, that there is ample travel demand for the quote unquote smaller MSA. So we really punch above our weight for travel throughout our region compared to other ones that, maybe have less so proportionally compared to their large population centers. Next slide, please. And this is what the study ultimately led into, is developing what they call the proposed network of preferred routes. The light gray lines, which might be harder to see on your screen maybe, are the existing skeletal Amtrak services. And the 15, or the colored lines, are the 15 new proposed routes that they're looking at to add into, in addition to the existing system, to really build up a true national network. Next slide, please. And that across South Dakota, that they've identified these two routes. The primary one that I think has really been the biggest impetus, and one running me ragged this last year, is the Twin Cities to Denver route across our state, along with the Twin Cities down through Omaha, Kansas City to Phoenix, Arizona route, which would run along the I-29 corridor. And again, while the map here for the FRA is kind of stylized in a way, they are also only looking at where there's existing legally secured railway rights-of-way. We're not talking about greenfield rights-of-way. We're not talking about doing eminent domain, but utilize the existing rail system and build on that for our future. And as you can see, that they've identified, from Sioux Falls through Pierre to Rapid City. But next slide, please. But one thing I want to emphasize for the group here, and well, really nationally, as things really develop forward, and why we want to see this study concept develop forward, not only for implementation, but really get to the nuts and bolts, is critically across the state, there are actually two routes, or two route alternatives that you could look at. How they have it shown right now, coming through Fort Pierre to Rapid, or utilizing the Badlands route directly through Chamberlain, Presho, and Kadoka. Really looking at, what are the trade-offs that way. And it's from my participation in the room and at the table at considerable personal cost, is I was able to inform the FRA that there in fact was a way to get out to Western South Dakota by rail, that they, for all their resources, did not know about it. So if I was not in the room and at the table, we would not probably be having this conversation today. So that's why it's important to help educate our congressional delegation and public officials that these are real, tangible things that we can be able to leverage for future opportunities. Next slide, please. And that critically, like I said, recognizing that they're not obsessing about population density, but actually the route across South Dakota, the Twin Cities to Denver route, actually has 4 times the travel demand on a per mileage basis compared to, next slide, please, the much vaunted and long needed route through southern Montana known as the North Coast Hiawatha route, that never should have gone away in the first place and has been recommended for reinstatement for decades, and has been recognized as feasible, desirable, and beneficial by the FRA's inclusion of this route in what's called the Corridor ID program, which is a mechanism to move this route forward in development. So this route is feasible, then the route across South Dakota is also feasible as well. Thank you. So next slide. So what does this long distance study mean for South Dakota currently? Is, like I said, there are 2 long distance routes identified in the proposed network of preferred routes. And actually, we believe that the last route through southern Montana could have a twin sister route that should run through via Aberdeen, Millbank, and Rowbridge as well, to kind of build up a true robust national system. That, as shown though, with just the 2 routes they have shown, that it would mean about 2/3 of the state population would have access to passenger rail today, where functionally we have 0% access to passenger rail. And that in fact, the route across South Dakota, Denver to Twin Cities, could actually have some of the lowest operation and maintenance costs of the 15 new routes identified, the second lowest, I believe, even though it's not actually the second shortest route, but just for the travel demands and travel dynamics across the connected cities. Twin Cities, Sioux Falls to Rapid, Rapid to Cheyenne and Denver. There's a lot of travel demand across there, as we all know. And that ultimately, the ongoing operations could result in hundreds, if not thousands, of direct and indirect jobs across the route, a couple hundred of which would very likely be based in South Dakota, and those are jobs that can't be exported. And then, of course, the direct annual job earnings that would come from these jobs, at least $52 million, if not more. So next slide, please. You'll be able to see this PDF afterwards, and I hope Carmen will be able to send it out. But this just gives you more of a broader overview about some of the other job earnings and benefits. Like I said, a low end about 1,000 jobs, if not probably greater, and then $52 million of direct economic annual earnings per year. And then think about the secondary and tertiary benefits of people spending that money in their communities. Next slide, please. So one thing we like to try to go through as we're going through this, and that I tried to do last year with the House and Senate Transportation Committees, is go through the myth busting about the common misconceptions about why people said, oh, well, passenger rail isn't feasible for us. Well, next slide, please. Is that there's often a myth about, we don't have the population density for passenger rail. But next slide, please. Is that population density does not travel, people do. And people in rural areas, in especially the expansive American West, we have disproportionately high travel demand compared to our low population and low population density compared to our population. And just really looking at, if you take people from a place with people to another place with people, people will utilize these services if they're well designed and user friendly for them. Next slide. And again, that the FRA long distance study has identified we have disproportionately high travel demand across our region compared to our population. In fact, our team with the National Rail Passengers Association has found that the single biggest factor for accommodating or compelling quality ridership for a station is not population density, or even time of day of service. It is frequency. Frequency is the single best factor for being able to have identify or garner the ridership and utilization that we should be looking for these services. Like I said, that North Dakota has the middle of the night serve Empire Builder service, but imagine if they had daylight service as well. Like I said, very few people go endpoint to endpoint, but a single seat ride in many overlapping city pairs. And while I'm sure many of us have had many a times driving across the state in the middle of the night, and how beautiful it can be, but it also can be pretty great during the daylight as well. So imagine going through the Badlands on a train. Next slide, please. Myth 2 that detractors often try to bring up is saying, oh, highways and airports pay for themselves, of course, but passenger rail subsidized. Next slide, please. I hate to break it to you, but highways are heavily subsidized. Since the year 2008, we as a nation have bailed out the Insolvent Highway Trust Fund to the tune of $276 billion, with a B, $276 billion. That's on top of the gas taxes and other user fees, which are supposed to pay into and supposed to keep that highway trust fund solvent, but it's not solvent whatsoever. So that's a heavy subsidy to the highway industry. Next slide, please. And that one a subsidy more close to home right now is the $210 million South Veterans Parkway project around Sioux Falls, which $176 million are coming from the feds on this section alone. And this is for construction, not including the ongoing operations and maintenance. Next slide, please. And also airports are heavily subsidized when you think about centralized air traffic control, TSA, and just operations, budget, and expansions. And most critically in South Dakota, we have another subsidy for Watertown, Pierre, and Aberdeen with the Essential Air Service Program, which is a great program, but that's a subsidy for the flights themselves as well as the infrastructure and operations. There's been proposed cuts coming, and we hope that they don't go through, but recognizing this is part of an interconnected transportation network. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there's the other direct subsidy, such as with Sioux Falls' brand new $63 million multi-level car corral parking garage there, which great to see that amount of demand there. But personally, I wish they would lower ticket prices rather than building more car spaces, but that's just me. Next slide, please. So ultimately, with the study, as I've identified the feasibility, the desirability of the routes across South Dakota and across the country, why should South Dakota be a priority? Next slide. Is fundamentally that we're the only state in the lower 48 that's never had Amtrak service in the 54, almost 55 years of Amtrak. It's just for the traditional services prior to Amtrak, and the system as it was turned over to Amtrak in 1971 has kept us relegated off the mat, not for lack of need or viability, just sort of that historical narrative up to that date. And as fair time that we should be a priority for it, since we've been the one most disadvantaged by not having it. Secondly, is Secretary Duffy has issued a directive focusing federal funding towards states and areas with higher birth rates and higher marriage rates. And I believe we've been at the top of both of those lists for a couple years running, at least. I believe the top 5, if not, I think one for births and 1 or 2 for marriage rates the last couple years. And third and most critical is the special transportation circumstances grants we receive, which is kind of the consolation prize for not having Amtrak service, are failing to compensate us for what we're losing by not having that service. Again, like I said, North Dakota receives $28 million of economic benefits per year, and that's money they don't have to apply for a year in and year out to get. Missouri receives over almost $50 million of economic benefits per year for their services. And the very most we've received for on an annual basis through the STC grant program has been $27 million a year. It was over a 2-year award. And that takes considerable amount of staff time to develop for the State Railroad Board to review, for the team at the State DOT and the railroads to send off to the FRA to apply for this SDC grant funding without any guarantees it will be fulfilled. And there are other federal grant programs available to us that we're not utilizing or not going after, that these SDC grants would also accommodate the projects for. So next slide, please. So ultimately, if you're interested and you want to kind of see stuff develop further, and hopefully with the resolution next fall, hopefully, or next spring, that hopefully we can refute any of the unfortunate misconceptions. How do we make it happen? Next slide. Ultimately, if you're interested, say you're interested, being able to get voice to paper. And that's why a resolution by the state legislature, not a blind commitment, but putting name to paper, is so critical at this opportune time, especially as we're heading back into surface transportation reauthorization next year. That we want to, not ask for people, communities to sign your lives away in blood to blindly support the stuff. But if you're genuinely interested in it, say you are, and ask the powers that be, whether it be the legislature, governor, DOT, or a congressional delegation, to do something about it. Next slide. And in our opinion, it should not be a pay-to-play scheme by the U.S. federal government in order for us to have a baseline level service across rural America. We should not have to plead and beg and pay out the nose to get that which other areas and other states have been entitled to through federal support for decades. We're not looking for any more than our fair share, but we do not feel we should put up with any less. And again, these routes we're talking about, these long distance routes, are interstate routes serving interstate transportation, interstate commerce. It should be an interstate federal responsibility to build out the baseline network. Next slide, please. So how do we make it happen? Next slide, please. That nationally, there are 536 individuals in Washington, D.C. Ultimately, we need to convey these interests up to. And in South Dakota, we have 3 key individuals right here. So 3 clicks, please. Most critically, we have Senator, also as U.S. Senator Leader through now for Senate. Next slide. It's Senator Rounds and Representative Johnson. Next click, please. Again, there's 536 individuals in DC, and these can be 3 critical allies. We have, especially with Senator Thune, who's on Senate Commerce, which oversees transportation, and Representative Johnson, who's on House Transportation and Infrastructure, also overseeing these things. So we need to make sure that we convey our interests to their offices as well. Next slide, please. And something for us to not sleep on is that actually our Senator, John Thune, received the 2016 Rail Passengers Association Golden Spike Award for his work with his dear friend there with the red tie, Roger Wicker in Mississippi, for service for Gulf Coast restoration, which finally, belatedly, restarted again this summer after almost a 20-year hiatus after Hurricane Katrina. And if he was able to expend political capital for the good people in the Gulf Coast, I hope he will do the same thing for us up here in South Dakota. Next slide, please. So what are the next milestones? What should we be asking our congressional delegation and the powers that be, the FRA, STB, to look at to get the answers for? And what should the House legislature resolution help compel is getting the full economic impact analysis and the service development planning. Like I said, the economic impact analysis, North Dakota receives $28 million of economic benefits per year. Missouri is $47-48 million of economic benefits per year. So imagine we want to be able to properly quantify what does a route across South Dakota, what could that bring for our economic benefits per year, and how could that outweigh what we only sometimes get through the SCC grant program. And of course, the service development planning are the nuts and bolts of how do we actually make these services happen? What are the upgrades that are needed? What are the agreements with the hosting railroads? Where would the stations be? What would the timetable? Those sorts of nuts and bolts and good questions you'd want to be able to know. When can you expect people coming in on the train? So next slide, please. In order for us to build up a true national network, again, it's not a be-all, end-all, but this is one part of an interconnected transportation network and should be the backbone. And that is absolutely critical that we're at the table and in the conversation rather than being on the menu as these routes move forward nationally. This needs to be a part of a true national network and not a spaghetti bowl of disparate routes that don't actually connect with one another. Next slide, please. In order to overcome what some people think is like, yeah, highways are important. I'm not giving up my vehicles, and I have multiple, but mostly are running. But they're one part of an interconnected transportation network. Next slide, please. In order to really see our communities as they are, as vibrant communities, that there's real people in real places with real transportation needs, and I argue really great places that a lot more visitors would want to come visit if they had greater opportunities to do so, or have opportunities to get here from here or between here and other places without having to put up and drive themselves or find alternative means which are not as user-friendly. Next slide, please. And ultimately, for all of you, that you live here and that you can make these things happen. Again, really encourage all of you, your various associations, city councils, county commissioners, county governments, whoever it might be, to really put name to paper. If you are interested, say you're interested, and ask, especially to your state legislators this upcoming session, for them to take up, get these questions answered, and to convey that up to our governor and to our Congress as well, and ask and expect for them to chase these questions down and get the right answers for us, and well thought out and well vetted answers instead of a reflexive, oh, it can't work here. So next slide, please. Again, I thank you all for the time. I'm really glad to be able to have this opportunity to come speak with you, and I open up for any questions you might have.
So Dan, just to clarify, there is existing rail line in the state of South Dakota.
Yes, there is. There's source through Fort Pierre there, which, the infamous truck-eating rail bridge we have, which I believe they're doing work on the roadway right now, but is well known nationally, I believe internationally. So that's one line they would use if they would go through Fort Pierre. Otherwise, there's, lines through Sioux Falls, Rapids. So the route as identified through the FRA long distance study would be utilizing existing rail line. So we're not talking about eminent domain. We're not talking about greenfield rights of way, which I know there's a lot of contention lately about other issues with eminent domain. So no, they're only looking at existing legally secured railway rights of way and upgrading them for the future.
So those rails would need to be upgraded in order to accommodate an Amtrak train. But two different types of trains would be utilizing the same rail?
Exactly so. And this is why I believe it would be a great catalyst. Irrespective of passenger rail, we already should be investing much more into our statewide rail system for the existing freight services we have. But this would be an extra catalyst like this. These, again, would be shared use lines. So both passenger and freight trains on the same lines, maximizing the utilization of it and having them not only well-funded and well invested in, and good quality for the future, and thus actually making these lines more attractive for private development or private industry in the future, such as Rapid City has the distinction being the most isolated metropolitan area in the lower 48. And I know the RCP&E does a good job, and they're upgrading the PRC line right now, which many of you probably have been following. But if we upgrade it for passenger rail standards, that can help make sure that Rapid City can compete effectively against Billings, Montana, Denver, North Platte, places, if an industry wants to locate out here, they might they might go default to some of these other places if we don't have our rail lines at the proper, national industry standards to support that. And then it becomes a catch-22 that we won't invest in it if we don't get that commitment from a business wanting to locate here, and they won't make that commitment unless they know that the rail lines are going to be reliable enough and at the service quality that they're looking for.
Okay, and remind me when we spoke earlier that there could also be splinter lines, if you want to call it that, off of the main line that would come through South Dakota? That would take you to different, or did I misunderstand?
Take us to a different, are you talking about in the freight or the passenger side of things?
The passenger side, to where, like, if there was a stop in Mitchell, per se.
Exactly. So there's opportunity to do, especially in the modern age of our smartphone era, we have a bit more connectivity and a bit more reliability, that we should be able to do what are called these, connection services as well. Very often, they can be a dedicated motor coach connection, but is a dedicated connection. So if your train's, 20 minutes later, whatever, you're not going to miss that connection, and can really facilitate and open up greater opportunities for people. Not only if you're in Mitchell, for example, you might be able to, bum a ride from some of your friends in the local area to get to the station. But if you're up in Huron or you're down in Yankton, there should be ways for you to be able to, get that first mile, last 50 miles sort of services. And that's why we want to see these routes not only develop further, but really identify through the next step, the full service development planning process, what are these connection services and how should they function? And personally, I guess on more the tourism as well as sort of regionality side of things, I really believe there's great capability and great need to really do a thorough, transportation analysis of the greater Black Hills region, not just, on the bounds within South Dakota, but South Dakota, Wyoming, northwestern Nebraska, even up to Montana. How could somebody, be able to hop off the train in Rapid and be able to get up to Spearfish Fine, or over to Moorcroft, or over to Sundance, wherever it might be, if they, can't drive themselves, don't want to rent a car, it's, how can we have that seamless mobility for them, not just as a tourist motor coach connection, but as a reliable enough service that both, the general public could use it there, grandma can be able to use it to go get to the train or go see the grandkids, or that it can be very attractive, user-friendly service for people, visitors, tourists visiting the area, to be able to get around the Black Hills, and why some tourists might want to come up to the Black Hills compared to, going out to the Colorado or out in California and other places that are frankly overrun with tourists nowadays. How do we really try to, be competitive for the next 20 years of development?
Okay. Angelica, up in Watertown.
I don't have any questions. I think this is really cool.
Thank you.
And Casey, what about a spur through Yankton?
As I'm looking at this picture on the screen, I'm just like realizing how foreign this whole concept is to us here in South Dakota. So it's definitely interesting, and yeah.
So Dan, do you I don't know, I don't have, let me see once here. I think I do have it actually. The prime sponsor on it from this year was Representative Goodwin. And so I'm curious, do you know, is he planning on and submitting this again?
Well, I can't speak for the representative, but as far as I've known in the conversations I had with him during the summer train track presentation in Rapid, I believe he's very favorably disposed towards that. So I certainly hope that he will, and I hope that the other proponents there for the other group, which isn't us, but All Aboard Amtrak South Dakota, which is a new group that was formed out in the Black Hills for this purpose, that they will help support this and make sure the bill is reintroduced for the future, and wanting to make sure we can kind of, refute and constructively refute these misconceptions or misrepresentations about what we're talking about. What is the commitment from South Dakota? And the most critical thing with the resolution, like I said, it's not a blank commitment, it's not putting money to the project, but saying, hey, we live here too, and we believe it. We should have the respect of being considered on parity with our counterparts across the country, which frankly, in my own opinion, have not really gotten their act together for decades. They've had plethora of studies on studies on studies, and they've done nothing with it. And so why should they be permitted to hold us back here? And that's why it's important for this resolution would be a real good weighted force there to be able to say nationally to the FRA, to Amtrak, to our congressional delegation, that these things are interesting to us, and we should be able to expect you to chase these things down.
Okay. All right. Well, Dan, what I'm going to be doing, I've recorded this and we're going to share it, on our YouTube channel, as well as share it in our newsletter and stuff, so we can get more people to watch the video. And hopefully, when we get close to session, we can look at this and get this passed if it gets presented again.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm not sure what your mad dash will be after the new year, but if you ever do sort of a quick little, like a lunchtime sort of roundtable Q&A stuff, I'm happy to come back if any of your members have any other pressing questions. But I hope that this gave you a good enough overview and made it digestible enough. And well, this is a lot of information, and for us in South Dakota, I know it's something that hasn't been on our radar for decades, but I hope that we can slowly change the conversation.
Okay. Well, we will definitely keep that on our thought for an agenda item, and possibly invite you to come back and do some kind of a presentation. Okay.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all. And I hope that you have a wonderful holiday season and a safe holiday season. And I look forward to seeing you next spring in Pierre.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.